Welcome back to part 2 of our inquiry into 19th century working class homes in Wales. If you remember, in the first part we used a virtual reality tour, census records and 1 or 2 still pictures to establish that poorer homes in industrial Wales were often pretty basic in terms of furnishings and facilities. They could be quite overcrowded and at times were even dismal or squalid. This must have made home life quite unpleasant for some people. But was it more than this? Did these conditions actually affect people's health, promote chronic or even fatal illnesses? In particular, what effects did they have upon children? In this second part, we'll pose and investigate a further question. 19th century houses, were they homes or death traps? Now this may sound a little over the top, but we'll see during the course of this inquiry both that conditions in some houses and streets were almost indescribably bad, and that death rates among young children were incredibly high. And we'll further gather that this was specifically because of the filth and squalor on many of the streets. We'll examine these issues through a study of 3 sources: gravestones, burial records, and contemporary medical reports. So much for the history. What about the learning? What will learners gain in terms of their thinking, their literacy, their numeracy or ICT? As I've mentioned before, to genuinely breed and nurture wider learning skills, the whole curriculum must have depth as well as breadth. This means learners should be challenged to think, question, discuss, share ideas and opinions, analyse and present information, draw conclusions and find explanations. With effective and informed subject planning, these issues should be essential and intrinsic to virtually any subject or topic. And these are the very tools through which we can develop and practice cross-curricular skills. This particular inquiry, not least because of the emotive and at times shocking nature of its content, will stimulate and encourage all of these skills, as you will see for yourselves both as we progress through the activities and when I come to the skills review at the end of this video. So, what's in the package? It's the same format as part 1, so we'll see the same types of documents. There's a contents list, which also describes each document, an inquiry plan, which includes a good deal of guidance, a skills review, which ties every activity to the relevant skills from the National Curriculum, LNF and Skills Framework, and an amended and enhanced glossary to help learners to understand any new or tricky words. Although there are a lot of materials in this package, this is essentially a simple inquiry, but which once again offers teachers the chance to explore in a little more depth if they choose to. It falls into 4 sections. A look at evidence from 19th century gravestones from northern Monmouthshire, which will immediately reveal the fact that many children died in 19th century Wales, sometimes whole family broods. A study of a sample of burial records from a neighbouring parish in southern Breconshire, showing that child deaths were not only common, but in fact formed by far the largest category of burials. A further look, if desired, at 2 mid-19th century medical reports from Newport, which describe the horrendous living conditions which must have been responsible for the obscenely high infant mortality rates. And finally, a communication exercise asking learners to draw together and sort this evidence and offer some conclusions and explanations of their own. You'll hopefully be realising by now that I like to give teachers a lot of support, such as background information, sources of evidence, sometimes in a choice of differing formats, teaching and learning resources, prompts for discussion or further activities, specific links with learning frameworks such as the LNF. This is partly because I just love history, but also because I'm conscious of how little specialist support has otherwise been available to schools over recent years, and this explains why these inquiry packages are quite large. It's not because the time requirement to teach them is particularly heavy, nor is it because they demand any specialist expertise from teachers. It's mainly because I don't like to leave teachers hanging high and dry, raising their expectations of what they might be able to achieve, but failing to give them the tools to do the job. And this is a principle which I carry over into all my support packages for the foundation phase and Key Stage 2. So let's get started. Why do we begin with gravestones? They're a great resource to use, firstly because they're widely available in most areas. They're easy to photograph and to present to learners on paper, whiteboard or computer. They require limited literacy and numeracy skills to interpret, but above all, they are highly emotive and will grab learners' attention immediately. I've included some examples I've selected myself, together with some background notes, but teachers could use their own local photographs should they wish. What are we trying to achieve? Well, this inquiry is about looking at the impact of poor housing and building on people's lives in the 19th century. And it seems to me there's no better way of driving home the potential effects of inadequate living conditions than by showing the ultimate price that many children had to pay. Sometimes it was isolated individuals. In many other cases, we see evidence of 3, 4 or 5 children in the same family all dying before they were old enough to even go to school. Obviously at this point I have to say that we need to be conscious of our learners' sensibilities with a study like this. With gravestones and burial records we will encounter many cases of infant deaths, which some children might find quite upsetting. Teachers know their own learners best and are therefore well placed to decide how deeply to explore these issues or delve into families' possible grief. The bare facts and figures speak for themselves, but we can sometimes also gain an insight into deeper feelings by considering some of the messages expressed on the graves. Usually grief and sadness, as we would expect, but sometimes also a suggestion of a faith which perhaps helped people to deal with their grief. A belief that those departed had merely moved to a better, safer, more comfortable life. As the parents of Jeanette Elizabeth Bevan wrote on her tombstone, "You are gone from your cot to a mansion above, and our hearts with dear anguish are riven. But why should we mourn for her that we love, when we know she is happy in heaven?" In fact, it was common in Victorian school storybooks for the special relationship between children and Jesus to be stressed, i.e. that children who died were simply going back to their natural father. This was done in part to prepare young school children for the fact that they would certainly lose some of their classmates in the course of their school life. So we know now that children died, sometimes whole family broods. But how common was this? Do the examples we've seen represent the exception or the rule? Graveyards can't supply an answer to this because too much evidence has been lost to the ravages of time. Gravestones weather, crack and fall. Plots are reused. Some are not marked in the first place. So we need a more complete, discrete sample of evidence. Thus, we move on to parish burial records.